In this deputation, I'll be calling on the Licensing Committee to recommend to the Council that the plans to licence busking in the Borough of Camden be dropped immediately in their entirety, and that the Council instead begins a new process of genuine consultation in the form of a public forum involving residents, business owners, musicians, artists and professional bodies to work out a way of managing the issues that genuinely do exist around busking in Camden, and I'm not saying that they don't. In the report that was prepared for Cabinet last week and that sits before you tonight, I think, although it's a slightly smaller pack, it's claimed that this policy takes into account the priority of harnessing economic growth by creating a light-touch regulatory framework that permits most street entertainment to take place whilst taking a proportionate approach on necessary restrictions. I would take issue with every single one of those points. There's nothing light-touch about this framework. There's nothing that permits most street entertainment to take place, and there's nothing proportionate about the enforcement measures. Councilor Abdul Hai claimed that this policy would add value and vibrancy to Camden, although he didn't explain how making people who pay the clarinet on the street apply for a special licence that costs £49 and takes 20 working days to process, and then requires a person to go before a panel to assess whether they're a fit and proper person, whatever that means, will add to spontaneity and vibrancy. He claimed that the new policy was necessary because busking was impacting upon people's quality of life and that buskers were suffocating people with continuous non-stop amplified music. I've conducted a thorough analysis of the 108 formal complaints received in the entire borough of Camden in the last year with regards to busking. 42 separate people made one complaint in the year. 5 people complained twice, 3 people complained 3 times, 3 people complained 4 times, 1 person complained 9 times, 1 person complained 11 times, and 1 person complained 15 times. So that means that 56 of the 108 total complaints were made by 9 people in the entire borough of Camden for an entire year, a borough that has 220,000 residents. So whilst we take these complaints seriously, they're not representative of the whole borough of Camden. They represent the strong feelings of individuals who don't necessarily speak for all the residents in Camden as a whole. Many of these complaints are spurious, and they seem to be complaining about the fact that there is a busker there at all. In the conversation that I've just had with a resident, I've been told, why don't you play indoors, or why don't you play in a venue? And there seems to be an objection to the right of people to use. Yeah. I'm going to give a couple of examples of the complaints. There's a busker on Camden Lock, busker on Canal Towpath on Oval Road. There's a busker, he's been there a number of times, Camden Lock. There's 2 African drummers. There's a busker adjacent to Canal Bridge. Many of these complaints are objecting to the very presence of the busker on the street and could well reflect the prejudice of the person calling in. No account is made in the log as to whether the complaint was valid or what investigation was made. The log constitutes a very flimsy evidential base for the introduction of this policy and leaves it wide open to legal challenge by judicial review. There may be a small minority of residents who feel very strongly that busking should be strictly controlled or banned altogether. Indeed, we're hearing from them tonight. But is it the job of the Council to mould the culture of Camden around the desires of a small group of people, or rather to keep in mind the common good and act on behalf of all who live, work and visit in Camden and make it the wonderful place it is to visit? Councilor Abdul Hai has claimed in media interviews that 64% of residents support the policy based on the consultation, but this claim is entirely misleading. Firstly, only 55 Camden residents responded to the consultation. Of these, only 30% were in agreement with all or the majority of the policy, whilst a further 39% were mainly in favour of the policy but answered no to 1 or more questions. This is not a meaningful representation of the views of the residents and voters of Camden. Given that the consultation presented busking in a negative light, making unsubstantiated claims in its introduction that busking causes danger to people and opportunities for petty criminals, claims that I've asked to see substantiated by as yet unanswered freedom of information requests, I have asked to see via unanswered freedom of information requests. Every question after the first question in the consultation assumed the policy would be introduced, and the design of the consultation, I would argue, was intended to produce a desired outcome. Even so, only 16% of the 155 people surveyed who answered the consultation agreed with all the policy, or most of the policy, and over 50% of the people who answered the consultation were either opposed to regulation outright or opposed regulation whilst agreeing with parts of the policy. 59% of respondents did not think Camden should adopt the London Local Authorities Act. 55% of respondents did not think the whole borough should be designated as a licensed street. 61.5% did not think that the application requirements were appropriate. 67.6% of respondents did not think the standard conditions for licences were appropriate. Even given its own skewed terms and the mere 149 people who participated, the consultation gives no mandate for the introduction of this policy in anything like its current form, and Councillor Abdul Hai misrepresents the conclusions of the survey.